All right. So tonight we're going to review for the final exam. There's going to be 72 questions. You're going to have 90 minutes to get it done. Make sure you have turned in all your bits of homework and uh, your term project as well. But it's going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to be using the RPNow system or whatever else you've coordinated through UA, eLearning. They're the ones, once I turn the test over to them, they administer it. So even if you're using a proctor someplace else, that proctor will need to get the exam through UA. So anyway, we're going to talk about all the questions. We're going to go through them kind of one by one, and it's going to be fairly comprehensive too, but this should focus your study. When we talk about insurance, that's one of the areas we're going to talk about. When we mention a beneficiary, what's a beneficiary? That's going to be the person that you designate, right? That's going to be the person who's actually going to get the proceeds from that policy. The insurance company really doesn't care who that person is, but you as the beneficiary, and again, this is a little grim, but you need to know, that you are the beneficiary and that there is a policy, because the insurance company's, not going to notice. They may figure out when the premiums aren't being paid, but if it's all prepaid or something like that, it's just going to be a little bit more awkward. It's better if you have a copy of the policy. When we talk about bonds, again, because of interest rates, and interest rates are going even lower now, everything I've kind of said about bonds in terms of doing it right now, it may not be the best, investment at this point. But again, you need to do your own due diligence, or perhaps speak to an investment advisor before you get involved. But one of the things that might come up is a notion that there might be a method to convert that bond into actual stock. So you'd be, moving from loaning that corporation or that municipality money into actually having stock in the company. So obviously this isn't going to apply to government entities, but commercial bonds, corporations that actually have publicly traded stock, there may be a convertibility function that might be interesting to you. Another thing about bonds, and this has to do with if the interest rate for the bond is higher than the prevailing rate. Let's say they've issued bonds at 5 or 6% because they had to. That's what the market required. They weren't able to sell the bonds at any less. Well, let's say interest rates fall and they're able to issue new bonds at 3%. Well, that company may not want those old bonds out there. They may want to execute a function to basically cancel those contracts, and that's called a call feature. So if you have a bond and it gets called, that's what's going to happen to you. Another item, and so this, the test itself is going to jump a little bit from one item to another. If there's a document that modifies a contract, say like an insurance policy or something like that, that is going to be a rider to that contract. It's going to be basically an addendum to that contract that's going to change it a bit. So you can find contract modifications, contract riders on a number of different issues, but specifically when it applies to insurance, that's what they're talking about. We also talked about mutual funds. There's so many different mutual funds out there, and it's fairly competitive. There are funds that charge a fee up front, like a commission fee, and those would be a loaded fund. I've never bought one of those, and I can't see the rationale for people to do that. Most times, if you're going to buy mutual funds, you can buy them directly from the vendor, from the brokerage that's offering those, and so typically you would want a no load fund, which means there's no sales charge paid on that. Here we're talking more about mutual funds. This particular one would be rapidly growing corporations. What would that be? So you'd have different funds. You'd have, say, a balanced fund. That might be a combination of different types of funds. Some growth, some larger blue chip companies. Anyway, that balance would just be sort of a compromise kind of fund. But one that's comprised of rapidly growing companies, that would be a growth fund. There's other types of funds out there. There's sector funds, which might concentrate on a certain economic sector, like say medical or defense or something like that. Income funds, those would invest in corporations that are paying a dividend. And then money market, that would just be a fund that's comprised of government securities. Very low risk, but again, very low yield. Other types of mutual funds, we see mutual fund invest in common stocks that are in the same industry. So we just mentioned that. That would be a sector fund, right? So healthcare sector, defense sector, high-tech sector. Why do you have mutual funds? Why not own individual stocks outright? Well, one factor is mutual fund companies are set up to deal with consumers, so it's a little bit easier. There's a little less jargon involved. You might want to go that route. But from a personal finance standpoint, the other reason for mutual funds would be a little bit more diversity. Since let's say you're going to, you think high tech is the way of the future, you could actually buy Apple or Intel or whatever. But let's say they have an off year, and AMD takes part in the chips, or maybe Dell makes a rebound and Apple falters or something like that. If you're invested in just a single stock, you have to make a series of correct guesses. Whereas if you bought a mutual fund that had a small portion of each one of those companies, you would have a higher likelihood, that you're not going to take as much of a hit if an individual company goes down. Now, then again, if you would have bought, say, Apple, and Apple had a tremendous year, if you're in a mutual fund that only has, say, 10-15% Apple, obviously your return is going to be a little bit, muted, a little bit moderated. So there's trade-offs in that. But mutual funds are dead easy to invest in, and you'll find that if you have a retirement plan, your company is probably going to be invested in mutual funds. It is important, though, that you kind of understand how mutual funds work and how the underlying stocks work as well, because that's what it's going to be based upon. Let's say you have a kid that it's your child. He or she is not age 18, and they have a huge party in a neighbor's house. There's a problem there. That's one of the things when we talk about on insurance. Number one, it's going to be a tough issue, but there's a concept known as vicarious liability, which means that you have some responsibility as the parent for the behavior of your minor children. So that's just an insurance term that comes up now and then. When you're making making a trade on stock or selling stock, there's different ways to do it. I'll just run through kind of a brief list. If it's going to be sold at a specific price, well, that would typically be done through a limit or a stop order, where, say, a limit order would be, when it drops down to $50, you're going to go ahead and execute a trade. So once that stock price drops down to $50, you had a limit order in, that limit order would be executed, and your trade would take place at that price. It would essentially be converted to a market order. A market order just means sell right now at what the market is selling, or buy right now at what the market is selling. So a little different. I typically, will watch, if I have the time, watch the market when it gets the price or where I want to trade. I'll go ahead and execute a market order. But if I didn't have the time, or I was under the impression that the price was going to get there in the next day or two, but I didn't want to watch it, I might go ahead and execute a limit order. Stocks that sell for less than $1 per share. Those are referred to as penny stocks, and not something you really want to get involved in unless the problem is there's a notion called pump and dump. What happens if you watch The Wolf of Wall Street? The man made a tremendous amount of money, and he was not unique. That was George Belfry, but there's all those people out there. It's very easy to do on the internet. They can create some hype about a stock and get the price to spike a little bit. And let's say the price, is trading for 15 cents. It goes up to, say, 40 cents, and you own, a ton of these shares because they're so cheap. It seems like you can make a lot of money. So there's a tendency to put in even more money, and the people who have perhaps artificially generated that market will sell, and that market will just go away, and that stock price will drop to, near nothing, and you're left holding the bag. And because it's a penny stock, because it's not listed on the stock exchange, and it doesn't necessarily need to comply with the SEC rules, the security exchange rules, you don't have a lot of recourse. So a lot of bad things happen with penny stocks. Plus the commissions on those compared to the stock price are outrageous. System requires insurance company to offer coverage to folks. So what happens is you get, it's a societal good to have insurance. Have everybody out there who's operating a vehicle. Now, it's not perfect, but you want to try and have everybody with insurance. Well, you got some folks out there who've got, horrific driving records, but yet they still have a license. Guys with DUIs who, still are driving. You still want those people to have some form of insurance. Now, it doesn't necessarily, the insurance company may have to sell it to them, but they can sell it at a pretty high price. So anyway, that's what they call an assigned risk pool. And what the state will do, they'll go to the insurance companies, and kind of a condition of doing business in the state will be, okay, you can sell insurance here, but as part of the agreement, you have to offer insurance to folks who have got less than stellar driving records. And so if you ever see like SR22 or some different filings, depends on the state, but in Alaska, that's generally what they're referred to, and it's people with poor driving records that still need insurance. What's the purpose of a will? So it's very simple. There's other types of wills, these living wills, and letters of instructions, but a legal will that you need from a personal finance perspective is legal description of a person's mind as to the disposition of his or her property at the time of their death. So again, it's not a verbal agreement. It's not something you just drew up yourself. No, it needs to be done by typically a lawyer or at least a paralegal, somebody who knows what they're doing, knows what the state rules are, and then has witnesses and makes it a proper legal will, because all those matters are taken care of in the state court, the probate court. So if you don't go through the proper process, well, you shouldn't even bother initiating it, because it's not legal unless it conforms to the state guidelines. There's a problem or two about just sort of more of a math problem, just not to the point where you probably need a calculator, but you may find it helpful. But anyway, person buys stock at one price, they sell it at a different price. How much money did they make? Did they pay a commission? Anyway, so you'll go through and do the math on that. If they did get an annual dividend, you'll need to calculate that. But not going to be, too awful difficult. Here's a person looking at a high risk stock, so they're trying to get a large, and again, it's one of these double up to catch up, kind of schemes. What is one of those investments? So your options would be a treasury bill. No, not at all. Very low risk, very low return. Certificate of deposit. Again, another government-backed security, very, very low risk. Typically, they have a little bit more of a time in them, like a 5-year CD or something like that. Low growth stock, so obviously not much chance for much potential because it's specified as low growth. So I'm not sure why you'd want to invest in that, but anyway. And then a low risk bond. Again, low risk is not, by definition, what they're looking at the problem. So the one answer that would stand out is a speculative stock. If you're a speculator, if you're speculating on the market, yeah, you're definitely after a high yield. Here's a lady. So this has to do with deductibles, and so in this case, this lady has to pay $500 for the doctor visits before her insurance company will make any payments. So yeah, that would be indicative of a deductible. So the same is true if you have an automobile insurance policy and you have, say, $1,000 deductible. You have to pay $1,000 before the insurance company will start paying. International tensions and gold prices. So this is something that comes up, especially if you watch some bad TV or whatever, that gold prices are supposed to respond to international crisis, because people will basically run to them in times of crisis. So easing of international tensions should cause gold prices to decline, actually. Now, decline is the right answer for the test, but keep in mind that silver and gold now have so many industrial uses that if, say, there is a crisis and they're saying, oh, you're going to make a lot of money because people are going to be very concerned about the whatever the instability is, and people are going to hoard gold. Well, a lot of times that's also associated with a decline in the economy, because manufacturing may stop or the economies may grind down a little bit, and that demand for gold for industrial uses, primarily in electronics and stuff, may be reduced. So there's a lot of moving parts there, but the theory, at least, is that in times of crisis, gold prices go up, and in times of peace, gold prices go down. Estate planning. So if you hear the term estate planning, they're talking about after you are gone, right? Yep. So dealing with what happens to your property after your death. So, yeah. The other things about estate planning, though, is it needs to be done while you're alive. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do from tax purposes to make things a more useful, more beneficial transition. So managing your property while you are alive, dealing with what happens to your property after your death, your family's financial security in the event of your death. So all those would apply. Financial leverage. If you ever hear the term leverage, what they're talking about is borrowing money, right? And in this case, leverage is when they typically use that, they're talking about borrowing money for investment purposes. So if you're buying stocks on margin, for example, that would be a form of leveraging. Or if you're have a mortgage on a piece of property, it's primarily for investment. That would be using leverage. Here's a multiple choice question regarding retirement. So my cost of daily living will decrease significantly once I retire. Not always. In fact, if you hope to have a good retirement, they might actually go up in terms of travel and other things. Here's another statement. I can only expect to live about 10 years into retirement, so that's all I need. You don't know how long you're going to live, and until recently, life expectancy was going up and up. Now, some of that decrease in life expectancy due to suicide and drug addicts and drug addiction. So, but if you're not one of those folks, yeah, you can expect to live longer than your parents did. Once I retire, all my medical bills will be paid for by Medicare. Not the case. There's always going to be gaps. My employer's pension plan will provide sufficient income to meet all my needs. If you were lucky enough to have a pension plan, but even then, it probably would not meet your needs. So the last one, I need to save whatever I can, even if it's a small amount, to help cover retirement costs. And that's the one true statement. And saving early is the important bet. Here's a lady. She's got some expensive equipment. She's going to be putting it on her policy. In the event of that theft, and let's say it's all in one particular item, like jewelry or photography equipment or something like that, you definitely want to make sure that's specified. So this kind of goes along with what I was talking about with a rider earlier. In this case, rider is not one of the options, but a personal property floater is. Same. But anyway, a specific document that's added to your general theft policy that identifies certain items that are of high value to make sure you're covered. This person died without a will. What's the legal term for that? That's intestate. You do not want to die intestate. What's going to happen there is you're going to go to probate court. It's going to take a long time, and it's just not going to be a good situation. A couple other terms they have in there. Probate is actually the court that deals with it. Codicil is like an addition or a modification to a will. Typically not used these days. You just drop a new will. Here's a guy with a will, and he's got a proper document after he dies. There's a legal process, and that would be probate. So if you ever hear him talk about probate court, that's what they're talking about. It has to do with distribution and things of the estate after somebody has passed. This lady is investing. She's looking for a fund that's aggressive now, more conservative later. So they have a lot of these funds, and we talked about this where there's a strategy out there to take more risk when you're young because you can, endure a few burbles of the market. But when you get older, closer to retirement, you should perhaps move into more conservative investments. Well, the mutual fund companies, they have funds that are set up to automatically do that, and they call those life cycle funds. And so, you'll look at a fund and it'll be like, life cycle 2055 or something like that. And that would be a fund for somebody who's planning on retiring in 2055, and that's when it would, hit in terms of marketing. Let's see what else. Talking about interest rates, what happens to the market value of a corporate bond with a fixed rate? What happens if interest rates decrease? So if interest rates decrease and you have an existing bond that's at a higher rate, your bond would be worth a bit more money because the new bonds that are coming out would be issued for a lower rate. So that's not really a very likely situation right now, though, because interest rates are so low that at some point they're going to start to go up. And so that's, again, why I've, don't own any bonds and would caution you against getting any bonds right now, because as interest rates grow up and you just bought some bonds, say today, your bond investment would be less attractive and less valuable. Okay. Here's another one. If you die without a will, the IRS confiscates your property now. Federal court now, that's done in state court. Your closest relative will receive according to federal law. No, again, it's not a federal issue, it's a state issue. Your letter of last instruction becomes your will. No, it does not. That will not be recognized by the probate court. Your state's laws of descent in distribution becomes your will. And that is what's going to happen. But it's just going to take some time. And it may not be in accordance with what you would have done. So just basically have a will. What does illiquidity mean? It means anytime you hear about liquidity, it means access to cash, right? So if you've got an illiquid investment, like, say, real estate, it's not a bad investment, but it's very hard to turn into cash quickly. Why do people purchase life insurance? And it's to, take care of the financial loss of the primary breadwinner. So there's not a one size fits all in terms of life insurance. If you and your spouse have no kids and you're both making a reasonable income, your needs for life insurance are probably quite low. Alternatively, if one of you works and makes pretty good money and the other one stays home and you have a bunch of children, well, you have a bunch of people reliant upon you and you have fairly large life insurance needs based upon that sort of lopsided situation. Here's another one with a stock purchase plan, or just a math problem. Here's a person trying to diversify their portfolio. Invest in a firm that has a potential to earn above average profits to other firms. So there's a couple different ideas in here: a defensive stock, cyclical stock, small cap stock, blue chip stock, or growth stock. So what she said was above average profits compared to other firms. So that would best describe the growth stock. Small cap just means a smaller company. Probably going to be, could be higher growth, but it just means that in terms of capitalization, the amount of money that company has is fairly low. So it doesn't necessarily equate to growth. Blue chip means established stock that's recognized. Probably not as much potential for growth on that one. Here's a guy. He bought a car with airbags, anti-lock brakes. What's he doing in terms of risk? Is he avoiding risk? Well, it's tough to avoid risk. Reducing risk? Yep, risk reduction. Assumption would be that's where you get, say, an insurance company. So it goes kind of hand in hand, though. If the insurance company is going to assume risk, they do have an interest in making sure, in this case, it's a safe vehicle. So they're also interested in risk reduction. And those two items do provide risk reduction. Life insurance premiums are determined by basically mortality tables, when you're forecast to die. Now this stuff is going to get very confusing as these companies can get access to DNA data and more refined data. The more data they have to correctly estimate when you're going to pass, they'd love to have that. But for a lot of you, it may, if you have some sort of existing condition, it may lead to you being uninsurable. So there's a lot of ethical issues. But generally, you want to protect that data because it could be used against you. This guy is single, 24, just graduated from college, making reasonable money. What types of investments would he look at? So corporate bonds, probably not ideal. Government bonds, very low risk, very low yield. Growth stocks, yep, probably the one to go with. Commodities, buying, pork bellies and orange juice futures. No, that's not a great long-term investment program, which is one of the caveats here. In money market fund, no, money markets are very safe but very low yield, so they're not going to be a wealth builder. Most health insurance policies, as you know, are sold by the employers. Well, they're sold to the employers and then offered to the workers. So the majority of people, to probably include you, will get some sort of health insurance at a discount through your employer, because the employer can get a better rate on it and pass those savings on to you, and you get the benefit. Historical performance of investments of 10%. Well, your choices are treasury bills, which barely get, they don't get 1%. Corporate bonds, no, not going to do it. Stocks, yes, they have. They can get 10%. Options, different thing. Options are tied to commodities generally and very speculative, and they do not have a 10% rate. As things like futures and options, there's two people involved in those investments. There's one person on one side and one person on the other side, and it's a zero-sum game. It's a little different than a stock market where, say, everybody can win. Investment company sponsoring a mutual fund must give a prospectus. The prospectus on a mutual fund is kind of the rules of the road. It tells what they can invest in, what their goals are. It just provides a lot of information. And so anytime you're going to buy a mutual fund, you have to at least acknowledge, it's like an end user license agreement, you have to accept and at least say you've read that prospectus. Whether you do or not, it's in your best interest to have read it, but they have to at least offer it to you. Here's an example of blank risk occurs when an investment does not keep up with prices that are increasing in the overall economy. So that would be inflation risk, right? So let's say you've got one of these government securities type things, a money market or a CD or something that's earning 0.5%, and inflation's going up a couple percent. You're 1.5% down in terms of buying power due to inflation. So you always have to keep inflation in mind. Annuity. Annuity it can be defined as the sort of the opposite of life insurance, where annuity pays as long as you continue living, whereas one of the drawbacks with life insurance, in order to collect it, you have to die. With an annuity, it's a series, typically it can be structured a number of different ways, but a series of payments that continue for the rest of your life. So the longer you live, the more those payments are going to accrue to you. Here's a lady just received a legal form in the mail from a firm which she owns stock. They want her to vote, basically. And the thing is, if you're, when you see these shareholder meetings, you might see them on TV or something. Those people own millions of shares typically. If you own, 50 shares in this company or that company, they're going to send you a thing in the mail saying, okay, send your proxy. And it basically assigns your voting rights to somebody else to vote on your behalf. They're not going to, provide you a spot for you at their big shareholder convention unless you have a sizable position with that company. Generally, they'll just get a proxy in the mail and they'll ask you to specify somebody. Here's a guy who's makes whatever amount of money per month, and he's paying all his bills, and he also sets aside money for investments right at the start of the month, and that's called paying yourself first. So just like that man in the video we watched, it's the best way to do it, rather than set aside a specific amount each month. At the end of the month, you might have excess money that you want to also include in the investments, but at a minimum, you should invest at the start of the month as well. Here's a lady. She's contributing money to her 401k, several different funds, 5% of her salary. And it looks like there's a match involved. So that's an employee-sponsored retirement program. Yep. Negligence in terms of insurance purposes. Failure to take ordinary and reasonable care. So if you ever end up in court you're being sued by somebody, you're found negligent, that is not a good thing. That means that you fail to take ordinary care, and you will be, um, when you're found liable, uh, the fees, that the damages will be significant. So, for example, if you have a swimming pool and it doesn't have a fence around it, or you have some sort of dangerous condition and somebody gets hurt, um, yeah, you're likely to be found negligent, and it's going to be very expensive for you. One of the advantages of being a limited partner. So a limited partner, if you're ever in that situation, it means you can't be involved in day-to-day management activities. From a financial perspective, it also means if you're involved on a limited basis, your losses are limited typically to the amount you have invested. Whereas if you were a full partner, an active partner, um, you can be held liable for everything you've got. So again, it's one of those situations where you don't want to jeopardize it. Back to insurance again. Apparel. How would we define apparel? Apparel, when you hear this in insurance, lightning, hail, flood, those are examples of perils. And you want all perils covered. You don't want, to be getting in this argument over the fence is destroyed. Was it wind, or was it hail, or was it, in most cases you don't care. You just know your fence is destroyed. Now the exception to this whole process is the flood situation, because flood is a federal program. So if there is an issue and there's a flood involved, you either do or do not have flood insurance. But for all other perils, typically you would be insured against it. If you have something that excludes things, especially like up here with earthquakes, and you want to be very careful that you have protection against that. If you can afford it, you may. There's certain situations where you just say, if that happens, I have to deal with it, because insurance may just be prohibitively expensive. Here's a lady. She's buying shares in a mutual fund, investing in companies with a long history of paying a dividend. So if you see dividend, you should equate that to income, right? In this case, equity income fund. Equity just means that you own a portion of a business. You've got equity in that. But the operative word is income and dividends. A company that pays a dividend is a company that is probably through the growth phase, and now they pay a dividend to the stockholders to encourage them to remain stockholders, and keeps the stock price higher. Possible losses due to negligence resulting in bodily harm to others. So again, that's going to be liability, right? Liability is from negligence. Let's say you get in a car accident and it's your fault. You are found liable. Renter's insurance typically just covers the personal property, right? You don't own the structure, so something like flood damage, that's a unique case, and that wouldn't apply in this case anyway. Building and structures, no. You're just the renter. Earthquake damage, that's going to be problems with the structure. So anyway, it's going to be that personal property. Here's a lady. She's got a coffee maker that's been recalled. She keeps using it. Since she's doing that, the peril in this case is probably going to be fire, but the fact that she's still using it, the coffee maker is now a hazard. And if she knew it was bad, then she's probably negligent. And because she was negligent, she'll probably be found liable for the damages. So anyway, you want to be careful that you don't do something stupid and start hearing those terms used in regards to your actions. Here's a lady just got 30 grand from the uncle who died, trying to decide how to invest it. Looking to put in 50% here, 10% there, 10% in foreign stocks. Anyway, they're kind of spreading it around and diversifying, right? Diversification is not having all your eggs in one basket. Here's kind of a unique question. I think we talked about this, the beta. When we're talking about stocks are volatile, right? They move up and down. But the whole market moves up and down. So how do you tell how volatile a stock is in comparison to the market? It's like, it's like tidal, and is the water high or low? Well, you have to know, how the overall ocean is and what it's like in regards to the others. So anyway, in this case, the Standard & Poor's 500, the S&P 500, has a beta of 1, right? And by definition, so if a stock is more volatile, let's say it's a beta 1.5, that means it's going to be 1.5 times as volatile as the S&P 500. If it's a 0.5, it would be half as volatile as the S&P 500. So beta is a unique term that applies to the stock market. Ease with which an investment can be converted into cash. That has to do with liquidity again. That's conversion into cash. Liquidity is the term you're looking for. We know about bond ratings. We know that there's a fair amount of, basically grade inflation. You don't want to typically be involved in any bonds that are lower than B rating, and you get down to the C ratings and you're looking at junk. So AAA is the highest bond rating by Standard & Poor's in this case. There's a couple different bond rating agencies, but they're fairly similar in the way they use their nomenclature, and if it's all caps and all A's, that's going to be the highest one. There's another one for liability. Legal responsibility for the financial costs of another person's losses. So liability. Math problem. So again, a calculator would be handy. They are allowed in that proctored situation. Uses for life insurance proceeds. We use for a number of different items. Perhaps funding an endowment, but more often used for things like mortgages or paying taxes, things like that, that might be associated with the estate. Here's a lady, she owns stock in a company, just advised that she'll be receiving 2 shares for every 1 share. So what's happened here is the stock is split. Sometimes stock prices will get up to fairly high levels, and for one reason or another, company doesn't want their stock trading at say $1,000. So what they'll do is they'll do a stock split, and rather, let's say you had 1 share of this $1,000 per share stock, they'll do a stock split and you'll now have 2 shares at $500 each. So it doesn't necessarily generate any wealth, although it is indicative of a company that appears to be going up in terms of stock price. But and I don't know, it just doesn't seem as common as much anymore. I know a lot of the stocks I'm trading in, they're above $1,000, and if they were going to split their stock, they should have done it quite some time ago. So when it does split, it doesn't mean that you've necessarily made any money. It just means you have, if it just does a single split, it just means that you have 2 shares from every one you had before, but their value is 1.5 the price. Okay. Real estate. Is real estate liquid? No. Real estate is illiquid. It takes a lot to get a real estate transaction done. There's a lot of factors that can prevent it from getting to completion. And so real estate is a tough one to get quick cash from a transaction. Talked about stock splits enough. If you're involved in an auto accident, what should you do? Not discuss the accident. I mean, even to make small talk, you're better off just to make sure people are safe, nobody's injured, but don't say, oh yeah, I'm sorry I did that or something like that, because it may come back to haunt you. Things about mutual funds, a ton of folks own them. Nearly half the households own them. There's more than 1,200 available. It's just a huge enterprise, and that's because almost anybody with any kind of retirement plan owns mutual funds. Greatest growth potential in terms of investments. They have a bank account, common stock, corporate bond, government bonds, treasury bills. Again, we talked about common stocks getting 10% per year, so that would make them the highest. Which of the following investments offer the least liquidity? It should be very obvious to you that it's going to be real estate again. I love real estate in terms of investments, as should you, but they are not liquid investments. Here's not a tricky question, but which one of the following is a true statement? And you got to kind of read each one closely. When choosing investment, it's not necessary to consider the risk factor. Yes, it is necessary. During inflationary times, there's the risk that the financial return on investment will not keep up with the rate of inflation. That's definitely true. Let's see if there's any others. The interest rate risk associated with investment in bonds changes, not necessarily. The risk of business failure deals with changes in the value due to changes of interest rates. No, business failure has to do with the business just not functioning properly. And the price of stocks, bonds, and other investments never fluctuate in the market. Yes, they do. That's why they're attractive investments, because there is some sense of volatility to them. So anyway, big picture on that one is there are many investments that you can get that are low risk that are not really investments at all, because they're not keeping up with the rate of inflation. What you're following statements correctly applies to term insurance. So term insurance, as we know, what you do is you specify that you want a certain degree in terms of time. So that is the term. And let's see. Protection is specified for a specified time. Yes, that is one of the items. It is usually more expensive than life insurance. Absolutely not. Whole life insurance is going to be considerably more expensive. The investment performance varies with the stock market. There is no investment with term. There's no cash value associated with it. The policy builds cash value. It does not. The premiums remain constant. They can. They not necessarily. Depends on how it's structured. Here's another one. Which one of these statements is false? Investors purchase mutual funds for diversification. That is true. Investors purchase mutual funds because of their professional management. That again is true. You have a fund manager to observe and make corrections. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not, but anyway, that's their functions. Investors who purchase mutual funds are guaranteed a higher rate of return than if they were to purchase comparable stocks and bonds. Now, there are no guarantees. They're the same as the underlying stocks. Here's another one, list of following statements. Which one's correct? Stock is a form of debt capital. No, stock is equity. You own a portion of the company. Bond is a form of debt capital. Stock must be repaid at maturity. Now, they're again talking about bonds. Bonds are a form of debt capital. That is true. Bonds do not have to be repaid at maturity. Yes, they do. And interest payments to bondholders must be declared by the boards of directors. Now, that's a non-statement. Who has the greatest need for life insurance? So, children? No, that's kind of wrong. Children, if your child dies, it's not like you won the lottery. Most of us do not want money associated with that. It's a sad occasion that should not be a financially rewarding occasion. Dual income couples, no, less of a need because the couple, one can make up for the other. Singles living with their parents, probably no need for life insurance at all. Singles living alone, again, they're single, so there's not a lot of folks dependent on them. Households with small children, definitely a need for life insurance in that case. Getting close to the end. You can depend on Social Security and your company pension to pay for your basic living expenses. False. Probably aren't going to have a company pension, and Social Security may or may not even be in existence when you retire. And even if you retire today, it's not typically enough for people to live on solely, at least with any kind of quality of life. And we're looking at the last one. This coverage protects your automobiles from risks such as glass breakage, falling on, kind of cats and dogs type thing. And obviously it's going to be something that's comprehensive, right? So there's different types of insurance. Collision means you caused the accident. You're at fault here, and you want your own car fixed. You need collision. The state does not require collision insurance. If you've got a loan on the vehicle, yeah, the lender may require it since it's essentially their car, but the state only requires liability insurance. So, pardon me. So that's it. Those are some of the items that will be discussed, on the test. If you've suffered through this, you'll do quite well on the exam. And look forward to reading your term papers, and good luck.